The first time Malik heard regret, he was 12 years old, sitting on the front steps of his shotgun house in the 9th Ward. His best friend, Marcus, had just turned to leave after they'd spent the afternoon trading baseball cards and arguing about whether the Saints would ever win a Super Bowl. The sun was setting, painting the peeling paint of their neighborhood in shades of amber and rust, when suddenly a wave of emotion crashed into Malik's chest, cold, heavy, and sharp as broken glass. It wasn't words. It wasn't even a sound. Really, it was more like drowning in someone else's sorrow, feeling their heart crack open and spill its secrets directly into his soul. The regret tasted like copper pennies and felt like winter rain. And somehow, Malik knew with absolute certainty that Marcus regretted stealing $20 from his grandmother's purse that morning. More than Thaith regretted that he'd never tell anyone, that the guilt would eat at him forever. "Why you regret taking that money?" Malik asked, without thinking, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Marcus froze mid-step, his dark skin going ashy with shock. He spun around, eyes wide, with a terror that 12-year-old boys shouldn't know. "What you talking about? I didn't take nothing." But Malik could still feel it, that crushing weight of Marcus's shame pressing against his rib cage. "From your grandma? $20. You crazy." Marcus backed away, nearly tripping over a crack in the sidewalk. "My mama's right. There's something wrong with you, Malik. Something real wrong." He turned and ran, his sneakers slapping against the pavement, leaving Malik alone with the echo of regret that wasn't his own. That was the day Malik learned that some truths were too heavy for words. That was the day he began his long journey into silence. At first, he tried to explain it to his mother, tried to tell her about the waves of emotion that hit him whenever someone walked away, how he could feel their unspoken regrets, like physical things pressing against his skin. She took him to their pastor, who prayed over him and declared him touched by the Holy Spirit. She took him to a doctor at Charity Hospital, who said it was puberty and prescribed vitamins. She took him to her aunt in Trem, who burned sage and muttered about gifts and curses being two sides of the same coin. But nobody really listened. Nobody believed that Malik could hear the things people wished they'd said. I feel the weight of words that died in their throats. They just saw a quiet boy getting quieter, a bright child, dimming like a light bulb on its last legs. The worst part wasn't the disbelief. The worst part was that he couldn't turn it off. Every goodbye became a symphony of regret. Every departure left him drowning in other people's should-haves and wish-I'd saids. His teacher's regrets about students they'd given up on. His neighbor's regrets about loves they'd let slip away. The mailman's regret about a son he'd never acknowledged. The corner store owner's regret about selling cigarettes to kids who reminded him of his dead brother. Malik learned to brace himself whenever anyone left a room. He learned to keep his distance, to avoid the kind of connections that made departures hurt. He stopped asking questions, stopped sharing observations, stopped doing anything that might chase people away and leave him choking on their unspoken sorrows. But even silence couldn't protect him from the worst regret of all. His father died on a Tuesday. A heart attack at work, the foreman said, dropped dead between one breath and the next while operating a crane at the port. Malik was 16. All knees and elbows and awkward silence. When they brought his father's body home for the wake, the house filled with mourners, with casseroles and tears and stories about what a good man Joseph Thompson had been. Malik sat in the corner, trying to make himself small, trying not to feel the regrets that rolled off every person who came to pay their respects. His father's co-workers regretted not noticing he'd been clutching his chest all week. His poker buddies regretted taking his money in last Friday's game. His brother regretted a fight they'd had 20 years ago about a woman, Neither of them ended up marrying. But when the last mourner left, and Malik stood alone beside his father's casket, the wave of regret that hit him brought him to his knees. It was different from the others, familiar and strange all at once. It took him a moment to realize why. The regret was his own. He regretted every conversation they'd never had. Every question he'd swallowed rather than risk hearing his father's unspoken sorrows. Every "I love you" that had died in his throat because he was so afraid of goodbyes. He'd spent so many years protecting himself from other people's regrets that he'd forgotten to protect himself from his own. His mother found him there, hours later, curled up on the floor beside the casket. Tears dried on his cheeks, and his voice gone hoarse from crying. After that night, Malik's silence deepened. It wasn't just caution anymore. It was penance. He'd learned that his own regrets were the loudest of all. By the time Malik turned 30, he'd built his life around silence. He worked the night shift at the Orleans Parish Coroner's Office, surrounded by the dead who had no more regrets to share. The job paid enough to keep a small apartment in mid-city, far from the memories that haunted the Ninth Ward. He had no phone beyond a basic flip phone for emergencies, no television to fill his apartment with other people's voices, no social media to connect him to lives he couldn't bear to touch. His co-workers at the morgue had long since stopped trying to draw him into conversation. They called him Ghost, partly because of how quietly he moved through the fluorescent-lit halls, partly because he seemed more comfortable with the dead than the living. They didn't mean it cruelly. Malik was good at his job, respectful to the deceased, meticulous with the paperwork. He just wasn't someone you grabbed a beer with after shift. The morgue at night was Malik's sanctuary, the industrial hum of refrigeration units, the chemical smell of formaldehyde and industrial disinfectant, the weight of silence that only the dead could provide. Here, finally, were people who had no more regrets to burden him with. Their stories were over, their words all spoken or forever held. Sometimes, when the medical examiners or funeral home workers left after identifying a body, Malik would catch the faint echo of their regret small things, usually wishing they'd been kinder to the homeless man on the table, regretting the fight they'd had with their spouse that morning. But these were manageable ripples compared to the tsunamis he'd weathered in his youth. He'd developed a routine that kept him insulated. Arrive at 11 p.m., when the day shift was eager to leave and conversations were brief. Check the intake log. Process any new arrivals. Update the computer system. Clean and prepare the viewing room for morning identifications. Take his lunch break alone in the supply closet, surrounded by boxes of latex gloves and body bags. Leave at 7 a.m., before the morning shift had time for small talk. It was a life measured in careful distances. Malik had learned to shop at the 24-hour grocery at 3 a.m., when only other insomniacs and shift workers haunted the aisles. He did his laundry at odd hours. He paid his rent by slipping a check under the landlord's door. Every interaction was calculated to minimize connection, to reduce the risk of hearing something that would echo in his chest for days. Some nights, when the morgue was especially quiet and the only sound was his own breathing, Malik wondered what it would be like to be normal, to say goodbye without drowning, to have friends whose unspoken sorrows didn't cling to his skin like grave dirt, to love someone without fearing the weight of their regrets. But then morning would come, and he'd walk home through empty streets, and the wondering would fade. This was his life. This was his burden. And after 18 years of practice, he'd gotten good at carrying it. Everything changed the night they brought in Jane Doe number 47. October had wrapped New Orleans in unusual cold, the kind that made old bones ache and had everyone complaining about their heating bills. Malik was updating the inventory system when he heard the service elevator rumble to life. He glanced at the clock, 2:47 a.m. Too late for scheduled deliveries. Too early for the morning pickups. The doors opened to reveal 2 EMTs with a gurney. Nothing unusual there. Sometimes bodies came in at odd hours, especially if there were questions about the cause of death. What was unusual was how young the woman on the gurney looked. Early 30s. Maybe. Dark skin unmarred by obvious trauma. Wearing a simple white dress that looked like it belonged in another era. Found her in City Park. The lead, EMT said. Already filling out paperwork. No ID. No phone. No. Nothing. Couple kids sneaking around after curfew spotted her by the lagoon. Thought she was sleeping until they got close. Malik nodded, pulling on latex gloves. Standard intake procedure. He'd transfer the body to one of the examination tables. Log the personal effects, in this case, none, and wait for the medical examiner in the morning. He'd done it hundreds of times. The EMTs helped him move the woman Jane Doe number, 47. According to the tag, they'd attached to her toe. She was light, almost bird-like. Her face in death was peaceful. Eyes closed, lips slightly parted, as if she'd been about to speak. Something about her tugged at Malik's memory, but he pushed the feeling aside. In a city like New Orleans, everyone reminded you of someone. The EMTs finished their paperwork, cracked a few tired jokes about the saint's latest loss, and headed for the elevator. Malik was already turning back to the body, reaching for the sheet to cover her. When it hit, the wave of regret that crashed into him was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It wasn't a ripple or even a tsunami. It was an ocean, trying to force itself through a keyhole. The force of it drove him to his knees beside the examination table. His vision went white at the edges. Blood began to drip from his nose, splattering on the white linoleum like rain on concrete. But worse than the physical pain was the specificity of the regret, because threaded through the overwhelming sorrow was a single word, repeated like a broken prayer. Malik. 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 His name, wrapped in 18 years of regret. His name, carrying the weight of words unspoken and time lost. His name, coming from a woman who was supposed to be dead, but whose regret was very much alive. Malik forced himself to breathe through the pain, to push back against the tide of emotion trying to drown him. He grabbed the edge of the examination table and pulled himself up, his legs shaking like a newborn colt's. The woman on the table hadn't moved. But now he looked at her. Really, looked at Herond. Memory struck like lightning. The shape of her eyes. The small scar on her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her bike at 10. The way her hands folded. Right over left. Just like she used to fold them when she was thinking hard about something. Leora, he whispered, the name scraping out of his throat like broken glass. But it couldn't be. Leora had left New Orleans the same year his father died. Left without a word. Without a forwarding address. Without a goodbye. He'd been 17, and she'd been 16. And they'd been the only two people in the world who understood each other's silence. Or so he'd thought. The regret pulsing from her still form told a different story. Malik stumbled to the sink, washing the blood from his face with shaking hands. He had to think. The EMTs had declared her dead, but the regret pouring off her was too fresh, too desperate to come from a corpse. He'd been around enough death to know that regrets faded with the last breath. The dead might leave echoes for the living to carry, but they didn't project their own anymore, which meant he turned back to the examination table, approaching slowly, as if she might bolt like a spooked cat. Up close, he could see things the EMTs might have missed in the dark of City Park. The faint rise and fall of her chest, So subtle, it was almost invisible. The tiny flutter of pulse at her throat, the way her eyelids moved slightly, as if she were caught in a dream she couldn't escape. Leora wasn't dead. She was somewhere between suspended, in a place where her body had slowed to near stopping, but her regrets screamed loud enough to make him bleed. Malik had a choice to make. He could call the EMTs back, report the mistake. They'd take her to a hospital where doctors would poke and prod, and maybe bring her back to full consciousness, where she'd have to explain why she'd been lying in City Park like she was waiting for death, where questions would be asked that neither of them might want answered. Or he could do what he'd always done when faced with other people's regrets. He could walk away, clock out early, go home, pretend he'd never seen her, let someone else discover the mistake in the morning. But the regret wouldn't let him go. It wrapped around him like chains, each link forged from a moment they'd shared and lost. Her regret at leaving without explanation. Her regret at not fighting harder for what they'd had. Her regret at spending 18 years looking for the courage to come back, only to end up on a morgue table, mistaken for dead. And underneath it all, the biggest regret, that she'd never told him the truth about why she left. Malik closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decision settle on his shoulders. For 18 years, he'd organized his life around avoiding other people's regrets. He'd chosen the dead over the living, silence over speech, isolation over connection. But here was Leora, caught between death and life, her regrets calling to him in a voice he'd never been able to forget. He made his choice. Moving quickly now, Malik pulled up the intake log on the computer. A few keystrokes changed Jane Doe number 47's status from received to pending pickup administrative error. He'd seen it happen before. Bureaucratic mix-ups that sent bodies to the wrong facilities. As long as he filed the right paperwork, no one would question it until morning. By then, he'd have her somewhere safe. But first, he had to wake her up. Malik had no medical training beyond basic CPR, but he'd been around enough near-death experiences to know that sometimes the body just needed permission to come back. He placed his hand over Leora's heart, feeling the faint rhythm beneath his palm. The contact intensified the wave of regret, making his vision blur. But he didn't pull away. "Leora," he said, his voice rough from years of disuse. "I hear you. I hear all of it. But you got to come back now. You can't tell me nothing if you stay there in the between." For a long moment, nothing changed. Then, like a tide, slowly turning, the crushing weight of her regret began to ease. Her breathing deepened. The pulse at her throat grew stronger. And finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, her eyes fluttered open. They were the same eyes. He remembered dark brown with flecks of gold, like amber caught in shadow. But now they held 18 years of story he didn't know. 18 years of searching that had led her back to him in the strangest way possible. "Malik?" Her voice was barely a whisper, a throat dry from whatever had brought her to that park bench. "Is it really you? Or am I still dreaming?" He helped her sit up slowly, careful not to move too fast. The examination room with its harsh lights and steel surfaces wasn't exactly the reunion spot either of them would have chosen. "It's me. But we can't stay here. Can you walk?" She nodded, though her movements were still sluggish, like someone waking from the deepest sleep. "I've been trying to find you for so long, but you disappeared. Like you became a ghost." "Maybe I did?" Malik admitted. He found a lab coat hanging on the back of the door and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Come on, my shift ends in a few hours. But I know a place we can go until then." He led her through the morgue's back corridors. Paths he'd memorized so well, He could walk them blind. They passed the storage rooms full of supplies, the administrative offices dark and locked, the loading dock where hearses came and went. Leora leaned on him, her body still remembering how to move. And with each step, the tsunami of her regret faded to something more manageable. There was a small break room in the basement that nobody used anymore, not since they'd renovated the main floor. Malik had discovered it his first year, and sometimes retreated there when the weight of other people's regrets grew too heavy. It still had an old couch, a coffee maker that probably violated several health codes, and most importantly, a door that locked from the inside. He settled Leora on the couch and found a bottle of water in the mini-fridge that someone had forgotten to clean out. She drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face, as if she was afraid he might disappear if she looked away. "How?" she asked finally. "How did you know I wasn't dead?" Malik sat in the ancient office chair across from her, maintaining the careful distance that had become second nature. "Your regrets. Dead people don't have fresh regrets. And yours were loud." She almost smiled at that. "You still have it then?" "The gift." "Curse," he corrected automatically. "Gift," she insisted. "You just never learned how to see it right." They sat in silence for a moment. But it wasn't the empty silence Malik had wrapped himself in for years. This was the kind of silence they'd shared as teenagers, sitting on her grandmother's porch or walking through the cemeteries, when words weren't necessary, because somehow they just knew. "Why did you leave?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Years of wondering, condensed into 4 words. Leora's face crumpled slightly, and even without the overwhelming wave from before, Malik could feel her regret like heat from a fire. "My grandmother was dying. The cancer came fast, faster than anyone expected. And she had family in Houston, cousins who said they'd take me in, but only if I came right away. No time for goodbyes. No time for explanations." She paused, fingers worrying at the hem of the white dress. "But that's not the whole truth. I could have found a way to tell you. Could have left a letter. Made a phone call. The truth is, I was scared." "Of what?" "Of what I felt when I was with you. Of how much it hurt to see you pulling away from everyone, including me. Of the way your gift was eating you alive and not being able to do anything about it." She looked up at him then, eyes bright with unshed tears. "But mostly, I was scared that if I said goodbye, I really said it, I'd hear my own regret reflected back at me, and I knew that would break me." Malik felt something crack inside his chest. A wall he'd built brick by brick over 18 years. "So you left without saying anything, and regretted it every day since." She laughed, but it was hollow. "You want to know something funny? I spent years learning how to find you. Hired private investigators who came up empty. Searched every database I could access. It was like you'd been erased from existence. I worked hard at that," Malik admitted. "No social media. No credit cards. No connections. Just work and home and nothing in between." "Why the morgue?" she asked. "Of all the places you could hide, why surround yourself with death?" He'd asked himself the same question 1,000 times. "Dead folks don't have regrets, I can hear. They're the only people who can't hurt me by leaving." "Oh, Malik." The sorrow in her voice was almost worse than the regret had been. "What happened to you after I left?" So, he told her, about the years of silence that calcified into walls, about the jobs he'd lost because he couldn't handle coworkers' departures at the end of each shift, about the relationships that died before they could begin because he was so afraid of eventual goodbyes, about the night he'd stood on the Claiborne Avenue Bridge and wondered if his own death would finally quiet the voices of regret that followed him everywhere. "But I didn't jump," he said quietly. Figured my ghost would probably hear regrets too, knowing my luck. So, I found this job, built this life. It ain't much, but it's quiet. Leora was crying now, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. I came back as soon as I could, first after college, then again after my grandmother passed, but no one knew where you'd gone. Your old house was torn down after Katrina. Your mama had moved to Atlanta. It was like you'd vanished into the city itself. Maybe I did, Malik said. New Orleans is good at keeping secrets. I never stopped looking, she continued, even when I moved to other cities for work. Even when friends told me to let it go, I kept coming back, kept searching. And then 3 months ago, I had a dream. Malik leaned forward despite himself. In New Orleans, dreams were serious business. You were surrounded by the dead, Leora said, but you were the loneliest living person I'd ever seen. And when I woke up, I knew you were here somewhere, hiding among the dead because they couldn't leave you. So you came back again. She nodded. I've been here for weeks, visiting every cemetery, every funeral home, every place I could think of where someone might hide among the dead. Then last night, she trailed off, frowning. I don't remember what happened last night. I was in City Park, sitting by the lagoon where we used to feed the ducks. I was thinking about you, about all the things I should have said. And then, nothing, until I heard your voice calling me back. Malik studied her carefully. The white dress she wore wasn't modern. It looked almost like a nightgown from another era. Her feet were bare, though he hadn't noticed before. There were no obvious signs of injury, no indication of what might have sent her into that death-like state. Leora, he said slowly, what exactly were you doing in that park? She met his eyes, and for the first time since she'd awakened, he saw fear there. I was trying to find you the only way I had left. My great-aunt, the one who lived in Trem. She taught me things before she died, ways to walk between worlds, to send your spirit searching while your body waits. She warned me it was dangerous, that sometimes people get lost between here and there. But I was desperate. The pieces clicked into place. You were spirit walking, looking for me on the other side. And I found you, she said softly. Found you here? Surrounded by death, but so vibrantly alive. The pull of your presence was so strong it yanked me back. But I came back wrong, caught between, until you called me all the way home. They sat with that truth between them. The bizarre reality of their reunion. In any other city, it might have seemed impossible. But New Orleans had its own rules, its own logic. The boundaries between life and death, between dream and waking, it were thinner here. So what now? Malik asked. You can't go back to wherever you were staying, looking like you just rose from the dead. And I can't exactly walk you out the front door of the morgue. Leora smiled. And for a moment, he saw the girl she'd been, the one who'd convinced him to sneak into abandoned buildings and explore forgotten corners of the city. Then I guess we'll have to sneak out, won't we? Just like old times. Despite everything, Malik found himself almost smiling back. My shift ends at 7. There's a loading dock that'll be empty until 8. I can probably find you some actual clothes in the lost and found. And after that? He hesitated. After that was uncharted territory. His carefully constructed life had no room for other people, especially not people whose very presence threatened to demolish the walls he'd built. But looking at Leora, still pale from her journey between worlds, still carrying 18 years of regret that mirrored his own, he realized those walls were already crumbling. After that, he said slowly, we figure out how to live with all this regret. Yours And mine. Both. She reached out, her hand hovering in the space between them. Not quite touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin. Or maybe we figure out how to let it go. The break room suddenly felt too small, too full of possibility. Malik stood abruptly, needing distance, needing to move. I should get back to work. Make sure no one comes looking for Jane Doe, number 47. You should rest. Malik? Her voice stopped him at the door. I know you're scared. I know this isn't what you planned. But I didn't spend 18 years looking for you just to lose you again. He didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to see the determination in her eyes. I don't know how to do this anymore. Leora, being close to people, hearing their regrets every time they leave a room, it's why I chose the dead. Then maybe, she said softly, it's time to choose the living. Malik left without answering, but her words followed him through the sterile hallways. Back in the main examination room, he mechanically went through the motions of his job, updating files, cleaning equipment, prepping for the morning shift. But his mind kept circling back to Leora, alive and impossible, waiting in a forgotten break room. At 6:30, he made his decision. He grabbed a set of scrubs from the supply closet and a pair of slip-on shoes that nurses sometimes left behind. It wasn't much, but it would be less conspicuous than a white dress that belonged in a ghost story. When he returned to the break room, Leora was standing by the small window that looked out at ground level. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I'd forgotten, she murmured, how beautiful sunrise could be. When you're used to being awake for it, it loses some of its charm, Malik said, setting the clothes on the couch. She turned to face him. When was the last time you really looked at one? Not just noticed it was happening, but really looked? He couldn't remember. Sunrises had become markers of time, signals that his shift was ending. Nothing more. Like everything else in his life, he'd reduced them to their function, stripped away their beauty to avoid feeling anything at all. Get changed, he said, deflecting. We need to move soon. While Leora changed in the small bathroom attached to the break room, Malik tried to plan. His apartment was only a few miles away, but he'd never brought anyone there. It was his last sanctuary, the place where he could exist without the threat of other people's regrets. Bringing Leora there felt like inviting a hurricane into a house of cards. But what choice did he have? He couldn't leave her on the streets. I couldn't take her to a hospital where they'd ask questions neither of them could answer. And, despite everything, despite the years and the silence and the walls he'd built, he realized he didn't want to let her go. Not again. She emerged from the bathroom looking almost normal in the borrowed scrubs, though they hung loose on her thin frame. I look like I'm playing dress-up, she said with a rueful smile. You look like someone who works here. Malik corrected. That's all that matters right now. He led her through the building one more time, taking service corridors and back stairs. They passed a few early morning workers, but no one gave them a second glance. Just another pair of tired medical staff heading home after a long shift. The loading dock was empty as predicted, the morning air cool and damp. Malik's ancient Honda Civic sat alone in the employee lot, more rust than paint, but still running after all these years. You still don't believe in nice things? Leora observed as he unlocked the door. Nice things break, he replied automatically, then caught himself. It was something his father used to say, back when they couldn't afford nice things anyway. He'd internalized it, turned it into a philosophy of life. Don't get attached to anything too good to last. The drive to his apartment was quiet, but the silence was different now, charged with possibility, heavy with unspoken words. Malik kept stealing glances at Leora, half convinced she might vanish like morning mist. But she stayed solid, real, her presence filling the car in a way that made him realize how empty it had been. His apartment building was a converted warehouse in Bywater, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures that had been trendy once, but now just looked tired. He led her up 3 flights of stairs to his unit, acutely aware of how she was seeing it for the first time. The space was Spartan to the point of emptiness. A futon that served as both couch and bed, a small table with 1 chair, kitchenette with the bare minimum of dishes and cookware, no pictures on the walls, no personal touches anywhere. It looked like what it was, a place to sleep between shifts, not a home. "Oh, Malik," Leora breathed, and he could hear the sorrow in her voice. "It's enough," he said defensively. "For surviving, maybe, but not for living." She walked to the window that overlooked the train tracks, where the sunrise was painting the industrial landscape in impossible colors. "Do you remember what you used to say? About how you wanted a place filled with music and laughter, where people could come and just be themselves." "That was before I knew what people being themselves really meant," Malik said. "Before I understood that everyone carries regrets like stones in their pockets. And I'm the only one who feels the weight." Leora turned from the window to face him. "What if I told you there was another way? What if instead of running from the regrets, you could help people let them go?" "I'm not a therapist, Leora. I'm just a man who hears too much. But that's exactly why you could help." She moved closer, careful not to touch him, but near enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes. "All these years, I've been studying alternative healing, energy work, the kinds of things my great-aunt taught me. And you know what I learned? Most people are desperate to release their regrets. They just don't know how." Malik sank onto the futon, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline of the night was wearing off, leaving him raw and vulnerable. "Even if that were true, I can't handle being around that much pain. You don't know what it's like. Leora, every goodbye is like drowning. Every departure leaves me gasping for air." "Then maybe the problem isn't the gift," she said gently. "Maybe it's that you've been trying to face it alone." She sat beside him on the futon, maintaining that careful distance he seemed to need. "What happened tonight? When you called me back, that wasn't just about hearing my regret. You did something with it. You transformed it, used it as a bridge to bring me home. That's not a curse, Malik. That's power. Power I never asked for. None of us ask for our gifts. But we get to choose what we do with them." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "I have a proposition for you." Malik looked at her warily. Even as teenagers, Leora's propositions had a way of upending his carefully ordered world. "Give me 1 month," she said. 1 month to show you a different way to live with your gift. To teach you what I've learned about energy and healing and transformation. If after that month you still want to go back to hiding among the dead, I'll leave. No goodbye. No regrets you'll have to carry. I'll just go. And if I say no now, then I'll leave today." "But Malik..." She finally touched him then, just her fingertips on the back of his hand, and the contact sent electricity through his entire system. "We've already lost 18 years to fear and regret. Don't you think we've hidden long enough?" The touch brought a wave of her emotions, not just regret this time, but hope and determination, and something that might have been love. Weathered by time but still recognizable. It should have been overwhelming. But instead, it felt like coming home. 1 month, he heard himself say. "But I keep working at the morgue. I need that stability." "Deal," she said, and her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. They spent the morning working out logistics. Leora retrieved her things from the hotel where she'd been staying, including clothes that actually fit, and a collection of books on energy healing that made Malik's head spin. She insisted on cooking breakfast, filling his barren kitchen with smells he'd forgotten could come from food butter and cinnamon and strong coffee. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" she asked, watching him devour the French toast she'd made. "Define proper." He mumbled around a mouthful, something that didn't come from a vending machine or a drive-through. He couldn't remember. Food had become fuel, nothing more. Like everything else in his life, he'd stripped it down to its most basic function. "This is what I mean," Leora said. "You've been so focused on avoiding pain that you've avoided pleasure too. Cut yourself off from anything that might make you feel. Feeling hurts," he said simply. "Sometimes. But it's also the only way we know we're alive." That evening, as Malik prepared for another shift at the morgue, Leora presented him with a small leather journal. "What's this?" "Homework," she said with a smile. "I want you to write down every regret you hear. Not just that you heard it, but what it felt like. What color it might be if it had one. What texture. What temperature. Start treating them as energy patterns instead of emotional assaults." Malik turned the journal over in his hands. It was well made, the leather soft and worn. "You really think this will help?" "I think running from something gives it power over you. Maybe it's time to turn around and face it instead." That night at work felt different. The morgue was still quiet, the dead still peaceful, but Malik carried the awareness of life with him. Leora's presence in his apartment, the taste of real food, the weight of the journal in his pocket. When the night security guard stopped by on his rounds, he lingered at the door. "You okay, Ghost? You look different." "Just tired," Malik said. But it was a lie. He wasn't tired. For the first time in years, he was awake. The guard started to leave, then paused, and there it was, the wave of regret that always came with departures. But this time, instead of bracing against it, Malik tried to observe it the way Leora had suggested. It felt like gray mist, cool and damp, with the texture of wool. The guard's regret about his daughter, who he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, over some fight he couldn't even remember the details of. Without thinking, Malik said, "Call her." The guard froze. "What?" "Your daughter. Call her. The fight doesn't matter anymore." The man's face went through several expressions: shock, suspicion, hope. "How did you—" "Just call her," Malik repeated, then turned back to his work. The guard left, but the regret that usually would have lingered in the air dissipated more quickly than usual, as if by acknowledging it, by speaking to it, Malik had helped it find a way out. He pulled out the journal and wrote, "Gray wool mist. Cool. Damp. Guard's daughter fight, 3 years ago. Told him to call." Regret faded faster. It was a small thing, but it felt like the first crack in a dam he'd spent 18 years building. The month that followed was unlike anything Malik had experienced. Leora transformed his empty apartment into something that actually felt lived in, not by filling it with things, but by filling it with presence. She brought plants that somehow thrived despite his neglect. She played music, jazz and blues, and the occasional bounce track that made her dance while cooking. She opened windows he'd kept closed for years, letting in air and light, and the sounds of the city. But more than the physical changes, she worked on changing how he experienced his gift. "Regret is just energy that's stuck," she explained one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the floor, while Malik practiced meditation techniques he was still skeptical about. "It wants to move, to be released. You've been absorbing it all, holding it in your body. No wonder it hurts." She taught him visualization exercises. ways to let the regret flow through him instead of into him, how to be a conduit instead of a container. It was hard work, and there were days when Malik wanted to give up, to retreat back into his safe isolation. But Leora was patient in a way that reminded him why he'd fallen for her in the first place. She never pushed too hard, never demanded more than he could give. She just stayed present, a steady warmth that slowly thawed the ice he'd packed around his heart. The real test came 3 weeks into their experiment. Leora had convinced him to go to a coffee shop during the day. When it would be full of people, the thought made his stomach churn. But he'd agreed, because he was starting to trust her judgment more than his own fear. They chose a small place in the Marini. All mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Malik sat rigid in his chair, hyper-aware of every person who might leave, every potential wave of regret waiting to crash over him. "Breathe," Leora reminded him softly. "Remember, you're not a wall for the regret to crash against. You're a door it can pass through." A woman at the next table gathered her things to leave. Malik could feel it building, her regret about the novel she'd never finished, the creative dreams she'd traded for a stable job. The wave approached, and instead of bracing, Malik tried to open. The regret flowed through him purple, like spilled wine, tasting of unused ink and dusty paper. But instead of drowning in it, he let it pass, acknowledged it. And then something unexpected happened. He found himself saying to the woman, "It's never too late to write that story." She turned, startled. "Excuse me?" "Sorry," Malik said, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. You looked like someone with a story to tell." The woman's eyes widened, then filled with tears. Thank you. I needed to hear that today." She left, but the regret that departed with her felt lighter, transformed somehow. "You see?" Leora said, her pride evident. "You're not just hearing their regrets. You're helping them heal." That became the pattern. Small interactions, tiny moments of connection where Malik would acknowledge what he heard and offer just a word or two of recognition. Not everyone was receptive. Some people looked at him like he was crazy. Others hurried away. But enough people paused. Enough people heard what they needed to hear. That Malik began to see his curse differently. "You're like a pressure valve," Leora explained one evening as they walked along the riverfront. "People build up all this regret, and you help them release it safely." "But what about my own regrets?" Malik asked. "I can help everyone else let go, but I'm still carrying 18 years of my own." Leora stopped walking, turning to face him. The setting sun painted the sky behind her in shades of amber and rose. "Then maybe it's time to let those go too. I don't know how." "Yes, you do." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see every detail of her face. "You start by forgiving yourself. For the silence, for the distance, for all the connections you didn't make because you were afraid. I regret losing you," he said, the words scraping out raw and honest. "I regret every day of those 18 years. "Then let it go," she whispered. "I'm here now. We're here now. The past is done, but the future is wide open." Standing there by the river, with the city lights beginning to twinkle on and the distant sound of a brass band carried on the wind, Malik felt something shift inside him. The wall of regret he'd built, brick by brick, began to crumble. Not all at once. Healing rarely worked that way, but enough that he could see through to the other side. He reached out, taking Leora's hand in his. The contact brought the usual wave of emotion, but now he knew how to let it flow through him, instead of drowning in it. What remained was warmth, connection, the simple miracle of another human's touch. "I want to try something," he said, The next evening, instead of going to work at the morgue, Malik called in sick for the first time in 5 years. He and Leora had spent the day preparing, transforming his apartment into something new. They'd pushed the furniture to the walls, creating an open space in the center. Candles provided soft light. Cushions and pillows made informal seating areas. At exactly 7 p.m., there was a knock at the door. The security guard from the morgue stood there, looking uncertain. "You said to come," he said. "That you could help? Come in," Malik said, stepping aside. Over the next hour, more people arrived. The woman from the coffee shop, a nurse who Malik had encountered at the hospital, a bus driver who'd overheard him talking to another passenger about letting go of old pain. Word had spread in that mysterious way it did in New Orleans, carried on whispers and intuition. Soon, there were a dozen people in Malik's apartment, all carrying their secret regrets like stones in their pockets. They sat in a loose circle, nervous and hopeful in equal measure. "I'm not a therapist," Malik began, echoing what he'd told Leora weeks ago. "I'm not a healer or a guru or anything special. I just hear things, feel things, the regrets people carry when they think no one's paying attention." He looked around the circle, meeting each person's eyes. "But what I've learned is that regrets are like anything else. We hold too tight. They hurt us more than whatever caused them in the first place. So tonight, if you're willing, we're going to practice letting go." What followed was unlike anything Malik had imagined. One by one, people began to share their regrets. Small things and big things, fresh wounds and old scars. And as they spoke, Malik could feel the energy in the room shifting, flowing, releasing. He didn't try to fix anyone or offer profound wisdom. He just acknowledged what he heard, what he felt, and helped create a space where people could finally set down their burdens. Leora moved through the group, offering tissues, gentle touche, quiet support. The security guard talked about his daughter, how they'd reconciled after that night when Malik had told him to call. The woman from the coffee shop had started writing again, just 15 minutes a day. But it was something. Others shared their own struggles, their own steps toward healing. By the time the evening ended, the apartment felt different, lighter, as if all those released regrets had opened windows to let fresh air flow through. "Same time next week?" the bus driver asked as people began to leave. Malik looked at Leora, who smiled and nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Same time next week." After everyone left, Malik and Leora sat in the candlelight, processing what had just happened. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Tired," he admitted, "but good tired. Like after you've been carrying something heavy and finally get to put it down. You know this changes everything," she said. "You can't go back to hiding after this." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. I think I need to quit the morgue. Find something else. Something with living people. Any ideas?" He thought about it. "Maybe grief counseling, or working with hospice. Somewhere, I can help people process their regrets before it's too late." Leora took his hand, and this time the wave of emotion that came with the contact was pure warmth. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know how hard this is. How much courage it takes to choose connection over safety." "Stay," he said suddenly. "Not just for the month. Stay for longer. As long as you want." "I was hoping you'd ask," she replied, "because I've got about 18 years of life to catch up on. And I'd rather not do it alone." They sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found their way back to each other through death and regret, and the strange magic of a city that understood both. Outside, New Orleans hummed with its usual nighttime symphony music from distant clubs, the rumble of streetcars, the occasional burst of laughter from passing revelers. But inside the apartment that was slowly becoming a home, there was peace. The kind that comes not from avoiding life's pain, but from learning how to transform it into something else. Something that could heal. The gatherings continued weekly, growing larger as word spread. Malik's apartment became known as a place where people could come to release what haunted them. He never advertised, never put up flyers, or created a website. People just knew. The way people in New Orleans always knew where to find what they needed. Some nights, only a few people came. Other nights, the apartment was packed, spilling out onto the small balcony he'd never used before. He learned to manage the flow of regret, to help it move through the space without overwhelming anyone, including himself. Leora was always there. Her presence, a steady anchor. She brought her own skills to the gathering's energy work, guided meditations, the wisdom her great-aunt had passed down. Together, they created something that wasn't quite therapy and wasn't quite church, but served a purpose somewhere in between. The morgue job ended with little fanfare. Malik gave his notice, trained his replacement, and walked away from the land of the dead without looking back. He found work at a hospice facility, where his gift helped dying patients release their regrets before the end. It was hard work, emotionally draining, but it felt like purpose in a way his old life never had. 1 year after that night, when Leora appeared on the examination table, they held a special gathering. The original group was there: the security guard with pictures of his daughter's new baby, the writer with her first published short story, the bus driver who'd started a support group for other drivers dealing with the stress of the job. "I want to tell you all something," Malik said, standing in the center of the familiar circle. "A year ago, I thought my gift was a curse. I thought the only way to survive was to cut myself off from everyone and everything. I chose the dead because they couldn't hurt me." He looked at Leora, who smiled encouragingly. "But I was wrong. The dead couldn't hurt me. But they couldn't heal me either. It was only when I started choosing the living messy, complicated, full of regret that I began to really live myself." "We all carry regrets," he continued. "It's part of being human. The question is whether we let them define us or whether we learn to let them go. This space, these gatherings, they're not about forgetting the past. They're about not letting it steal our future." The security guard raised his hand. "Can I share something?" Malik nodded. "When you told me to call my daughter that night, I thought you were crazy. Some weird morgue guy trying to give advice. But I couldn't shake it. Kept hearing your voice saying, 'Call her,' every time I tried to sleep. So I did. And you know what? She'd been wanting to call me too. Both of us stuck in our pride and regret, wasting years over nothing." He pulled out his phone, showing a picture of himself with a young woman and a baby. "This is my grandson, born 2 months ago. I'd have missed all this if you hadn't." I heard what I couldn't say. Others began sharing their own stories of transformation, small miracles that had grown from the simple act of acknowledging and releasing old pain. Malik felt the familiar wave of emotions, but now it felt like music instead of noise complex. Sometimes dissonant, but ultimately beautiful. After everyone left that night, Malik and Leora stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. The air was thick with humidity and the promise of rain, but neither moved to go inside. "Do you ever regret it?" Leora asked. "Letting me back in? Opening yourself up to all this?" Malik considered the question seriously. His life was certainly more complicated now. Have felt more, hurt more, worried more. The simple silence he'd wrapped himself in for 18 years was gone forever. "No," he said finally. I regret the years we lost. But not this. Not choosing to live again. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. They stayed on the balcony, letting the rain wash over them. Two people who had learned that sometimes the only way out is through. 5 years passed. The gatherings evolved from Malik's apartment to a proper space-an old church in Trem that had been damaged in a hurricane and never quite restored. With help from the community and a few small grants Leora had written, they transformed it into something new. The sign outside read simply, "The listening room, a place for letting go." Inside, the space was warm and welcoming. Comfortable chairs, arranged in various configurations. Soft lighting. Plants everywhere. Leora's influence. A small kitchen where someone was always making coffee or tea. And in the center, a circle of cushions for the main gatherings. Malik's gift had evolved too. He could still hear regrets. But now he could also sense when someone was ready to release them. He'd developed techniques for helping the energy move, for creating space where old pain could transform into new possibility. They'd trained others, 2 people who'd come through the gatherings and discovered their own gifts for holding space, for listening, for helping others heal. The listening room was open every day now, staffed by volunteers who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do for someone was simply acknowledge their pain. Leora had started teaching workshops on energy healing and grief processing. She'd written a book about their journey. Though she'd changed names and details to protect people's privacy, the dedication read, "For M, who taught me that silence can be sacred, but connection is divine." On this particular evening, Malik was preparing for the weekly main gathering when a young woman appeared at the door. She looked to be about 17, all sharp angles and defensive posture, with eyes that had seen too much. "Is this the place?" she asked. "Where you can get rid of stuff that's eating you up?" "It's a place where you can learn to let go," Malik said carefully. "But it's work, not magic. I hear things," she blurted out. "When people leave, feel what they ain't saying. My mama thinks I'm crazy. Doctors want to put me on pills. But I heard about you. Heard you got the same thing." Malik's breath caught. In 5 years, he'd never met another person with his specific gift. He'd started to think he was unique. A one-off glitch in the universe. "Come in," he said. "Tell me about it." Her name was Aisha, and her story was heartbreakingly familiar. The gift had manifested when she was 13. After her older brother was shot, she'd felt his regrets as he died, all the things he'd never do, never say. Since then, she'd been drowning in other people's unspoken sorrows. "I can't turn it off," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Every time someone leaves a room, I feel everything they're carrying. Teachers, friends, strangers on the bus. It's too much." "I know," Malik said simply. "I've been there." He spent the next hour sharing his story, teaching her the first basic techniques for managing the flow of regret. Leora joined them, adding her own insights about energy and boundaries. "You're not crazy," Malik told Aisha firmly, "and you're not alone. This gift, and it is a gift, even when it doesn't feel like it's hard. But it doesn't have to destroy you." "How do you stand it?" Aisha asked. "Feeling everyone's pain all the time?" "I learned that I wasn't feeling their pain," Malik explained. "I was feeling their need to release it. Once I understood that, everything changed. Instead of drowning in their regrets, I could help them let go." Aisha stayed for the evening gathering, sitting quietly in the corner. Watching how Malik facilitated the group, he could feel her gift working, picking up on the regrets that filled the room. But he could also feel her learning, understanding that she wasn't trapped by what she could hear. After the gathering, As people filtered out into the warm night, Aisha approached him. Could you? Could you teach me? Like, for real? My mama can't afford therapy, or nothing. But I need to learn how to live with this. Malik looked at Leora, who nodded with a smile. We'll teach you, he said. Both of us. It's not easy. But you don't have to do it alone. As Aisha left, lighter than when she'd arrived, Leora slipped her hand into Malik's. Full circle, she murmured. Yeah, he agreed. Guess I'm not as unique as I thought. Oh, you're still unique, she said, squeezing his hand, just not alone. They closed up the listening room together, turning off lights and making sure everything was ready for the next day. As they stepped out into the New Orleans night, Malik could hear the city's symphony of regrets-all, the unspoken words, and missed chances floating on the humid air. But now, instead of weight, he felt possibility. Each regret was a chance for healing, for connection, for transformation. The city that had taught him to hide among the dead had also taught him to live among the wounded, and to help them heal. Home? Leora asked. Home, he agreed. They walked through the quiet streets, past houses where people nursed their secret sorrows, past bars where regrets were drowned but never dissolved, past the cemetery where the dead kept their silence. But Malik no longer envied the dead their peace. He'd learned that living meant feeling the pain and the joy, the regret and the release. And while his gift would always make him different, it no longer made him alone. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the listening room. A news crew from the local station, following up on what they called the healing movement in Trem. Malik had always avoided publicity, but Leora convinced him that sharing their story might help others who were struggling in silence. The reporter, a young woman with kind eyes, asked thoughtful questions, not sensational ones about his gift, but about the work they did, about the community they'd built. What would you say to someone who's carrying regrets they think they can't let go of? She asked. Malik thought carefully before answering. I'd say that regret is like grief, it needs to be witnessed, not fixed. Most people aren't looking for someone to take their pain away. They're looking for someone to acknowledge that it's real, that it matters. Once you feel truly heard, letting go becomes possible. The segment aired that evening. Within hours, the listening room's voicemail was full. People calling from across the city, across the state, some even from neighboring states, all carrying burdens they didn't know how to put down. We're going to need more help, Leora said, looking at the blinking message light. We'll find it, Malik assured her. People who've healed often want to help others do the same. He was right. Over the following weeks, more volunteers emerged. Some were people who'd been through their own healing at the listening room. Others were therapists, social workers, and counselors who wanted to incorporate their methods. Even a few priests and ministers came, recognizing that what happened here complemented rather than competed with traditional spiritual practices. The work grew, but so did the support. They started training programs for people who wanted to facilitate groups. They partnered with local schools to help kids deal with trauma and loss. They created special sessions for first responders who carried unique burdens of regret from the things they'd seen and couldn't prevent. Through it all, Malik continued his own practice. Every morning, he'd sit in meditation, feeling the flow of regret through the city like a river running to the sea. He no longer tried to dam it or divert it. He simply acknowledged it, honored it, and helped it find its way to release. One evening, as he was closing up the listening room, his phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Malik. The voice was uncertain, Aged. It's Marcus. From when we were kids. Malik's breath caught. His first friend. The one whose regret had started it all. I saw you on the news. Marcus continued. Been carrying something for near 40 years now. That day, you knew about the money I took. I ran 'cause I was scared. But I regretted it every day since. Losing you as a friend. I mean, not the money gave that back to my grandma's same day. But losing you. That ate at me. Marcus, Malik said softly. It's okay. We were kids. Can I come to one of them meetings? I got a lot of stuff I've been carrying. Of course. You're always welcome. When Marcus showed up the next week, grayer and heavier than Malik remembered, they embraced, like the brothers they'd once been. The circle that night was especially powerful, full of stories about childhood regrets and the long shadows they cast. After the meeting, Marcus lingered. You know what's funny? He said. All these years, I thought you were cursed. But look what you built from it. Look how many people you done helped. It took me a long time to see it as anything but a curse. Malik admitted. Maybe that's the real gift. Marcus said. Not the hearing, but what you chose to do with it. They promised to stay in touch this time. And Malik knew they would. Another circle closed. Another regret transformed into reconnection. That night, Malik shared the story with Leora as they prepared for bed in their small apartment above the listening room. Do you think everyone has a gift like mine? He asked. Something that seems like a curse until they figure out how to use it? I think everyone has something that makes them different, Leora said thoughtfully. Something that isolates them, until they learn how to let it connect them instead. Your gift is just more obvious than most. What's yours? He asked, though he thought he knew. Finding lost things, she said with a smile. Lost people. Specifically. It's why I couldn't give up looking for you. I could feel you out there, like a missing piece of the universe. And now? Now, I help other people find their missing pieces. Sometimes, it's a person. Sometimes, it's a part of themselves they've lost. But it's all connected. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city through their open window. Music from a distant club. Laughter from the street below. The ever-present symphony of life in New Orleans. I love you, Malik said suddenly. They'd been together for years now, but he still didn't say it enough. Still struggled sometimes with vulnerability. I know, Leora replied, finding his hand in the darkness. I hear it even when you don't say it. That's my gift, to hearing the love underneath the silence. Years flowed by like the Mississippi, carrying new stories to their door. The listening room became a fixture in the community, as essential as the corner store or the second-line parades. They expanded to a second location in the 9th Ward, then a third in Gentilly. Each space had its own character, but all carried the same mission, to help people release what haunted them. Malik's hair grew gray at the temples, and lines appeared around his eyes from years of holding space for others' pain. But he moved with a lightness that hadn't been there in his youth, as if each regret he helped release also lifted something from his own shoulders. One autumn evening, as he prepared for what would be the 1,000th gathering he'd facilitated, Aisha appeared at his door. She was 22 now, in graduate school for counseling psychology, but she still came back to help when she could. I've been thinking, she said, about documenting what we do here. Not just the techniques, but the stories. With permission, of course, but I feel like the world needs to know that there's another way to deal with pain. Malik considered this. He'd always been private, protective of the sacred space they'd created. But he also remembered his own desperate years, when he thought he was alone with his gift. "If you do it right," he said finally, "if you protect people's privacy and honor their trust, then, yes, I think it could help." Aisha's project became a book, then a documentary, then a movement that spread beyond New Orleans. Groups started forming in other cities, people gathering to practice the art of letting go. Not all of them had gifts like Malik's, but they all had the human capacity for witness and release. The attention was overwhelming at times. Malik had to learn new boundaries, how to be public with his work while keeping his own spirit protected. Lyra helped, as she always did, reminding him that he couldn't pour from an empty cup. They instituted quiet days at the listening room, times when no groups met and the space was available for solitary reflection. Malik would often spend these days there himself, sitting in the familiar circle, feeling the accumulated healing that had soaked into the very walls. One such afternoon, a woman appeared at the door. She was elderly, moving slowly with a cane, but her eyes were bright with purpose. "Are you Malik?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Dolores Jackson, Marcus's grandmother." Malik's heart skipped. Marcus had passed 2 years prior. A heart attack like his own father. They'd had 5 good years of renewed friendship before the end. "He told me what happened when he was 12. Dolores continued. "How you knew about the money. How he ran away and lost you as a friend. He said it was his biggest regret, until y'all found each other again. He was a good man." Malik said, "We all make mistakes as kids. That's why I'm here." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This was in his things. He wrote it years ago, but never sent it. The envelope was yellowed with age. Malik's childhood address, written in Marcus's 12-year-old handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. "Dear Malik, I'm sorry I ran. I'm sorry I called you crazy. You were right about the money, and you were trying to be a good friend. I'm scared of what you can do, but I'm more scared of losing you. Please, can we still be friends? Marcus." Malik felt tears spring to his eyes. Even in death, Marcus had found a way to release this last regret. "Thank you," he told Dolores. "This means more than you know." He also left this. She handed him a check. For the listening room. He said it was interest on $20. 40 years overdue. The check was for $20,000. After Dolores left, Malik sat in the empty listening room, holding the letter. He could feel the ghost of young Marcus's regret, preserved in paper and ink. All these years, but he could also feel the peace of closure. The circle finally complete. Leora found him there as sunset painted the room gold. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Yeah," he said, showing her the letter. "Just thinking about time. How we can carry something for 40 years that could be healed in 40 seconds if we just had the courage to speak. That's why the work matters," she said. "Every person who comes here, who finds that courage they're saving themselves, decades of pain. They sat together as darkness fell. 2 people who had found their way through silence to speech, through isolation to connection, through curse to gift. 10 years after that first gathering in Malik's apartment, they held a celebration. The listening room was packed with people whose lives had been touched by the work. Former clients who'd become facilitators, volunteers who'd found purpose in serving others, community members who'd watched a movement grow from one man's pain into a citywide practice of healing. Malik stood before them all, still uncomfortable with public speaking, but willing to push through for this moment. "When I was young," he began, "I thought my gift was a punishment. Every goodbye was agony. Every departure left me drowning in regrets that weren't mine to carry. So I chose the dead. Because they couldn't hurt me anymore. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the crowd. Many of them had their own versions of choosing the dead over the living. But here's what I learned. He continued. The dead don't need us. It's the living who need witnesses to their pain. Acknowledgement of their regrets. Permission to let go. My gift wasn't meant to isolate might. Was meant to connect me to everyone who's ever held too tight to something that needed releasing. He looked at Leora, who smiled encouragingly. From the front row, we all hear things others don't, he said. Maybe not literal regrets like I do, but we all pick up on the unspoken pain around us. The question is, do we run from it, or do we help carry it until it's light enough to let go? The room burst into applause. But Malik wasn't finished. I want to thank you all, he said, when the noise died down, for trusting us with your stories, for doing the hard work of healing, for proving that connection is stronger than isolation, that speaking is braver than silence, that choosing the living messy and painful as at ISIS, the only way to truly live. The celebration continued late into the night, full of stories and laughter and tears. At one point, Malik stepped outside for air and found himself face to face with a ghost from his pastone of the EMTs who'd brought Leora in that night at the morgue. I always wondered what happened to that woman. The EMT said, we were sure she was gone. She was just lost. Malik said, sometimes people need help finding their way back. And you? The EMT asked. You found your way back too? Malik thought about it. The years of silence. The walls he'd built. The careful distances he'd maintained. All of it necessary for survival. But none of it living. Yeah, he said finally. Took a while. But I found my way back. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Malik felt the familiar wave of regrets that came with goodbyes. But now it felt like music complex. Sometimes sad, but ultimately beautiful. Each person leaving carried less than they'd brought. And that lightness rippled out into the world like stones thrown in still water. Leora appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. Ready to go home? She asked. In a minute, he said. Just want to feel this for a bit longer. They stood together in the doorway of the listening room, watching the last stragglers disappear into the New Orleans night. The city hummed with its eternal music jazz from the clubs, laughter from the bars, the distant whistle of a train heading somewhere new. You know what I never told you? Leora said suddenly. That night in City Park, when I was spirit walking, I wasn't just looking for you. I was ready to stay on the other side if I couldn't find you. The regret was killing me slowly anyway. Malik turned to her, shocked. Leora. But then I heard your voice, she continued, calling me back. And I realized that maybe the point wasn't to escape the regret, but to transform it. To use it as fuel for something better. Like what? Like this? She gestured at the listening room, at the work they'd built, at the life they'd created. Every person we help is proof that our pain meant something, that those 18 lost years led to thousands of healed ones. They locked up the listening room and walked home through familiar streets. Malik could still hear the city's regrets, would always hear them, but now he also heard its hopes, its dreams, its stubborn insistence on joy, despite everything. Their apartment was quiet, a sanctuary from the intensity of their work. But it was no longer the empty space Malik had once used to hide from the world. It was full of life plants and pictures, books and comfortable,